They tied the little girl to a fence, a stark silhouette against the unforgiving sun, her small frame a testament to cruelty. The dust, thick and indifferent, swirled around her bare feet, coating her ankles in a fine, suffocating powder. Her cries had long since withered, replaced by a haunting, silent tremor that shook her from the inside out, a tiny, fractured bird. The town, a collection of sun-baked shacks and wary gazes, seemed to hold its breath, a silent accomplice to this grotesque ritual, this so-called punishment for sins untold, for a perceived stain on their collective honor. They saw a scapegoat, a vessel for their own unspoken fears and failures, projecting their shadowed souls onto the fragile innocence they sought to break. Each splinter in the rough-hewn wood of the fence seemed to mimic the jagged edges of her despair, a physical manifestation of the invisible shackles that bound her spirit. The air hung heavy with the unspoken judgment of a community steeped in hypocrisy, their pious pronouncements ringing hollow against the backdrop of such unadulterated malice. What did they hope to achieve, these righteous arbiters of pain? Did they imagine a cleansing, a purification through suffering? Or was it simply the raw exercise of power, a brutal demonstration to reinforce their brittle order? The girl's eyes, wide and unblinking, stared into the vast, indifferent horizon, seeing not the promise of dawn, but the endless, consuming emptiness of a world that had forgotten how to be kind. The sun beat down, a relentless hammer on an exposed nerve, baking the very marrow from her bones, draining the last vestiges of color from her lips. She was a silent scream, unheard by all but the wind that whispered tales of forgotten mercy, a mercy that seemed to have abandoned this dusty outpost of humanity long ago. Her small hands bound tightly were raw, chafed testament to her futile struggles, yet even in that desolation, a flicker of something unyielding remained, a desperate, defiant spark, barely visible but stubbornly present in the depths of her gaze. Before we get into this tale, let us know in the comments where are you watching from, and subscribe if you want more content like this one. The shadow fell first, long and distorted, stretching across the parched earth like a premonition. Then came the man himself, a figure carved from the very desolation he rode through, a spectral presence on a dust-coated mare. His duster, worn and faded, seemed to absorb the light, drawing the world's attention to the stark, unyielding lines of his face. This was Elias Thorne, a name whispered in saloons and hushed across campfires, a name synonymous with quiet destruction, with a justice as swift and brutal as the desert storm. The town's silence, once merely oppressive, now became a living entity, a palpable tension that gripped every throat. Doors remained closed, windows dark, yet unseen eyes peered through cracks, tracking his every measured step. He dismounted, the soft thud of his boots on the dry earth an echo in the profound stillness. His gaze, a cold, unwavering steel, swept over the huddled figures, past the fear-laced faces of the town elders who had sanctioned this cruel spectacle, until it rested upon the girl. Her small, trembling form, lashed to the fence, seemed to absorb all the light from the world, drawing his focus like a magnet. A subtle clench tightened his jaw, a muscle working beneath the weathered skin. No words were spoken. The air itself thrummed with unspoken questions, with the weight of past deeds and future reckoning. He drew his pistol, not with a flourish, but with a practiced, almost weary efficiency that spoke of countless uses. The click of the hammer echoed unnervingly loud in the stifling quiet, a sound of finality. It was not pointed at anyone, yet its presence was a direct challenge to the unspoken complicity of the town. His eyes, devoid of overt anger but brimming with a deeper, colder resolve, met those of the man who stood closest to the girl, a burly figure whose face was a mask of self-righteous indignation that now began to crumble at the edges. Elias Thorne took one more deliberate step, the dust rising around his boots like the ghostly memories that clung to his name. The silence stretched, thinner and more fragile with each passing second, until it felt as if the very fabric of the world might tear. He didn't shout, didn't threaten. His voice, when it finally came, was a low rumble, barely audible over the thudding of 100 unseen hearts. "Untie her." The words were not a request, but an undeniable command, delivered with the quiet authority of a man who had faced death too many times to fear its shadow. The burly man, who was apparently the town's self-appointed elder, hesitated, a flicker of defiance warring with the cold, hard glint in Thorne's eyes. This was the moment of decision, the point of no return where the brittle courage of the mob met the unyielding will of a single, dangerous man. A bead of sweat traced a path down the elder's temple, a tiny river carving through the grime of his fear. The other townspeople, still hidden, seemed to collectively hold their breath, their loyalty to their self-proclaimed justice wavering under the oppressive weight of Thorne's presence. The silence stretched, taut and agonizing, until it snapped with the soft metallic scrape of Thorne's boot shifting an inch, a subtle movement that spoke volumes. The elder, his face paling, finally relented, his hands fumbling with the rough knots. Each tug, each release of the rope was a small, humiliating surrender. The girl, once free, swayed, her legs stiff and unresponsive after hours of enforced stillness. She did not run, did not cry out, but merely stood there, a small, lost thing, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and disbelief. Thorne holstered his pistol, the leather creaking softly, a sound of finality. He knelt before her, his large frame somehow less intimidating when stooped. He offered her a canteen, the cool metal a stark contrast to the burning sun. She took a tentative sip, her gaze never leaving his face, searching for a meaning she couldn't yet grasp. He said nothing, allowing her the space to exist in this new, bewildering freedom. The town remained silent, a collective gasp swallowed by the vast, indifferent desert. They knew, even if they wouldn't admit it, that something fundamental had shifted. The journey began not with a gallop of escape, but with a slow, deliberate walk. Thorne held the girl's small hand, her fingers fragile within his calloused grasp, a delicate thread connecting two broken worlds. Her steps were hesitant, uneven, as if she were learning to walk anew on ground that offered no forgiveness. The town, once a crucible of her pain, receded into the shimmering heat haze, a memory already fading, replaced by the endless expanse of the desert. Elias rode his mare, the girl perched carefully in front of him, her tiny weight of foreign yet oddly comforting presence against his chest. He felt the rapid beat of her heart against his ribs, a small, vulnerable rhythm in the vast silence. He did not ask her name, nor did she offer it. Words seemed inadequate, an unnecessary intrusion into the profound emptiness they both carried. He offered her jerky, dry, and tough, but she ate it slowly, deliberately, as if each bite was a small victory against the gnawing hunger that had become her constant companion. His own past, a landscape as desolate as the one they traversed, flickered at the edges of his mind, a constant, unwanted companion. He remembered a different child, a different injustice, a different fence. The memory was a shard of glass in his gut, perpetually twisting. This girl with her wide, haunted eyes was a mirror, reflecting back the parts of himself he had long sought to bury. He had tried to forget the smell of burning wood, the sound of desperate screams swallowed by the wind, the helplessness that had gnawed at him then. He had built walls around his heart, brick by painful brick, forging himself into the unyielding figure known as Elias Thorne, the man who exacted cold, precise vengeance. But this small hand in his, this fragile presence, threatened to dismantle it all, one painful, quiet beat at a time. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery streaks of orange and purple, a fleeting beauty that seemed out of place in their somber world. He found a small, sheltered alcove in the rocks for the night, building a fire whose flames danced like silent questions in the deepening twilight. The fire crackled, spitting sparks into the vast, indifferent darkness, each tiny ember a fleeting star in the desert's profound canvas. Elias watched the girl, her small form curled by the warmth, her breathing light and even. Sleep for her was a temporary reprieve, a fragile bridge between one day of terror and the uncertain dawn. For him, sleep offered no such solace. His mind, a restless engine, churned with images that had haunted him for decades. A different girl, younger perhaps, but with the same wide, innocent eyes. He was barely a man then, a raw youth, full of righteous anger and the naive belief that the world could be bent to justice. They had called her a witch, a curse upon their meager crops, upon their ailing livestock. Superstition, a venomous whisper, had curdled into a furious roar, consuming the small, isolated settlement. He had tried to intervene, a lone voice against a tide of unreasoning fear. He remembered the feel of rough hands seizing him, the brutal impact of a fist against his jaw, the taste of dust and blood. He remembered being held back, his struggles futile, as they dragged her towards the pyre they had hastily constructed. The stench of smoke and fear still clung to him, an invisible shroud. The flickering light of their burning torches had illuminated the terror in her eyes, a silent plea that echoed his own helplessness. He had broken free eventually, but it was too late. The flames had already claimed her, a cruel final embrace. He had watched, paralyzed, as the cries of the mob turned to triumphant shouts, their faces illuminated by the inferno, twisted into grotesque masks of victory. He had sworn then, in the ashes of that injustice, that he would never again stand by, helpless while the innocent suffered. That oath had forged him, refined him in the fires of sorrow and rage, shaping him into the formidable, feared figure he had become. It was a vow born of profound failure, a silent promise etched onto the canvas of his soul, a debt he had been paying, one violent encounter at a time, ever since. The memory was a cold, sharp blade, always present, always reminding him of the cost of inaction. Days bled into one another, marked only by the rising and setting of the relentless sun and the shifting landscape of their slow, measured journey. They moved through canyons carved by ancient waters, across endless shimmering flats, and over low, stony hills. The vastness of the land seemed to dwarf their two small figures, yet within that immensity, a fragile understanding began to take root. Elias spoke little, his words as sparse as the desert rain, but his actions conveyed a silent, unwavering commitment. He shared his meager rations, always ensuring she ate first. He taught her how to recognize safe water sources, how to spot tracks in the dust, how to tie a knot that held firm. She, in turn, began to emerge from the shell of her trauma, like a small, bruised blossom unfurling towards a hesitant sun. Her initial silence, a protective shroud, gradually softened. She would point out a distant hawk, a curious lizard, a peculiar rock formation, her voice a soft, reedy sound that surprised him each time. He learned her name was Alara, a name that tasted of wind and wildflowers. He noticed the way she watched him, her eyes no longer filled solely with fear, but with a quiet, observant curiosity. Once, while he tended the fire, she reached out a small, hesitant hand and gently touched the rough fabric of his duster. It was a gesture so innocent, so devoid of judgment, that it pierced through the layers of his hardened exterior, a tiny, almost imperceptible tremor in the fortress of his soul. He didn't flinch, didn't recoil, but simply allowed her touch, a moment of profound, unspoken connection in the vast, empty canvas of their new existence. He had spent a lifetime pushing people away, isolating himself in the cold comfort of solitude, but Alara's unwavering presence was chipping away at the walls he had meticulously constructed. He found himself inexplicably drawn to her quiet resilience, to the way she found small wonders even in the bleakest of landscapes. She was a silent testament to the enduring human spirit, a reminder that even after the deepest cuts, there remained a stubborn will to heal, a fragile, determined insistence on life. Their journey, once an escape, now felt like a meandering path towards an unknown destination. They had settled into a rhythm, a fragile dance of two disparate souls finding a semblance of peace in the vast wilderness. But the desert, a place of stark beauty and hidden dangers, was never truly safe. One blistering afternoon, as the sun baked the very breath from their lungs, Elias spotted them first. 3 riders, silhouetted against the shimmering horizon, moving with a predatory slowness that spoke of intent. They were not mere travelers. Their gaits were too deliberate, their formation too organized. His hand instinctively went to the familiar weight of his holstered pistol. These were men who hunted, and the chill that snaked down his spine told him they were hunting him. The air grew heavy, thick with an unspoken threat. Alara, sensing the shift in his demeanor, grew quiet, her small hand instinctively finding his duster, clinging to it like a desperate prayer. He had enemies, of course, a lifetime's worth of them, scattered across the arid plains and the dusty towns he had passed through. Justice, delivered by his hand, rarely left men smiling. But these men felt different. There was a cold, calculating hunger in their approach, a sense of an old debt finally coming due. As they drew closer, the glint of sunlight on metal became visible, rifle barrels, long and lethal. A dark, unwelcome memory surfaced, a notorious bounty hunter, known for his relentless pursuit and his unshakable conviction that Elias Thorne was a devil in human skin, responsible for a score of sins he himself had merely punished. This hunter, a man named Sterling, harbored a personal vendetta, fueled by a mistaken belief that Thorne had been responsible for the death of his brother in a prior skirmish. It was a classic misidentification, a tragic twist of fate, but Sterling's hatred had festered, transforming into an unyielding obsession. The approaching riders represented that festering wound, finally come to bleed. The very ground seemed to tremble beneath their hooves. Each beat a hammer blow against the precarious peace Elias had found with Alara. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that this was not merely a chase, but a confrontation he could not avoid, a direct challenge to the fragile future he was trying to build, a future that now included the small, trusting girl by his side. The days leading up to the punishment were a blurred nightmare for Alara, a suffocating fog of fear and confusion. Her memory, once fractured, had begun to mend under the quiet care of Elias, revealing the cruel tapestry of her past. She remembered the whispered accusations, the hushed condemnation of the townspeople, their eyes narrowed with suspicion and fear. Her family, newcomers to the isolated settlement, had always been outsiders, their quiet ways misinterpreted, their unfamiliar customs viewed with a collective mistrust. Her mother, a woman of gentle spirit and an innate understanding of herbs and remedies, had been deemed a witch, her healing touch twisted into a dark art. When a sudden illness swept through the town, claiming several children, the blame, like a ravenous beast, had turned towards Alara's mother. The town elder, the same man who had tied Alara to the fence, had led the charge, his voice a bellowing thunder, his eyes alight with a zealous fury. Alara had witnessed her mother's desperate pleas, her father's futile attempts to reason with the enraged mob. She remembered the crude torchlight illuminating their faces, grotesque masks of fear and self-righteous anger. Her parents had been driven out, forced to abandon their home, their meager possessions, everything, swallowed by the insatiable maw of fear-driven ignorance. Alara, too young to fully comprehend the depth of their prejudice, had been left behind, an orphan in all but name, a living symbol of their supposed triumph over evil. She was meant to be a lesson, a constant reminder of their power, a vessel for their unexamined anxieties and their collective guilt. The fence, then, was not just a punishment for her, but a public declaration, a brutal reaffirmation of their control, a stark warning to any who might dare to stray from their narrow, unforgiving path. Her small body, tied and exposed, was a canvas upon which their darkest fears were painted, a silent scream against the suffocating weight of an entire community's unchecked prejudice. The memory was a visceral ache, a cold hand squeezing her small heart, a reminder of the arbitrary cruelty that had upended her entire world. The confrontation was swift, brutal, and inevitable, a dance of death under the unyielding sun. Sterling and his men, fueled by a singular burning hatred, closed in, their rifles glinting like hungry eyes. Elias pushed Alara behind a cluster of jagged rocks, his voice a low, urgent command for her to stay hidden, to not make a sound. The air crackled with a tension that threatened to shatter. He drew his pistol, the familiar weight a comfort in his hand, a conduit for the coiled violence within him. "Sterling," Elias called out, his voice cutting through the dry air. "This isn't your fight. Leave us be." Sterling's laugh was a harsh, rasping sound. "Thorne, you run, you hide, but you can't escape what you are. The devil always gets his due." The first shot whizzed past Elias's head, kicking up dust. He returned fire, his movements fluid, economical, a predator defending his territory. The dry washes and scattered boulders became a deadly arena. One of Sterling's men stumbled, a silent slump to the ground. Another cried out, his shot going wide. Elias moved, a ghost in the shifting dust, his shots precise, impactful, each one a testament to years of honed instinct and countless grim encounters. But Sterling was tenacious, his hatred lending him a brutal resolve. He pressed the attack, his own shots dangerously close, a relentless drumbeat of vengeance. This was not just a gunfight, it was an exorcism of old demons, a desperate struggle not only for survival, but for the nascent hope that Ilara represented. Elias saw the glint in Sterling's eyes, the unhinged obsession, and knew that logic would not sway him. It was a fight to the death, a bloody reckoning for a past that clung to him like a shroud. A bullet grazed Elias's arm, a searing pain that sharpened his focus, reminding him of the stakes. He wouldn't just be fighting for his own life, but for the chance to give Ilara a future, a life free from the shadows that had consumed his own. The desert wind howled, a mournful dirge for the lives caught in this violent maelstrom, for the innocence shattered and the justice yet to be found. The sun dipped lower, casting long, distorted shadows, turning the world into a grim tableau of violence and desperate survival. When the dust finally settled, leaving a metallic taste on the air, silence descended, heavy and profound. Sterling lay motionless, his unseeing eyes fixed on the vast, indifferent sky. His vendetta finally brought to its grim conclusion. Elias, blood trickling from a shallow wound on his arm, stood over him, his chest heaving, the remnants of adrenaline coursing through him like a wildfire. He looked utterly spent, a monument to the violence he carried, yet also to the fragile peace he now sought. He turned towards the rocks where Ilara was hidden, his gaze soft, though etched with exhaustion. She emerged, slowly, cautiously, her small face streaked with dust and tears, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and dawning understanding. She had witnessed the raw, brutal reality of his world, the cold necessity of his skills, the profound darkness he had to navigate. He knelt before her, wiping a streak of dirt from her cheek with a thumb that trembled slightly. There were no words of explanation, no platitudes. He simply held out his hand, an unspoken question hanging in the air. Do you still trust me? Can you still see a future with a man like me? Her small hand, without hesitation, found his. Her grip, though weak, was firm. It was a silent affirmation, a profound act of acceptance that spoke volumes, a tiny beacon of warmth in the desolate landscape. He closed his eyes for a moment, a wave of profound relief washing over him, a feeling he hadn't known in decades. He had faced down death countless times, but this quiet, unassuming trust, this fragile connection, felt like the most precious victory he had ever achieved. The fight was over, but the journey towards true healing had only just begun. The sun was setting, painting the western sky in hues of fiery orange and deep violet, casting long, dramatic shadows across the land. A new day would dawn, and with it the faint but distinct promise of a life rebuilt, a future carved out of the wilderness, forged in the crucible of their shared, hard-won survival. The small cabin stood on a low rise, overlooking a valley that pulsed with a quiet, verdant life, a stark contrast to the parched, unforgiving lands they had traversed. Elias had found it, or perhaps it had found him, a forgotten outpost nestled beside a meandering stream, hidden from the world by a veil of ancient pines. It was rustic, humble, yet held the promise of shelter, of permanence. He had spent weeks repairing it, his calloused hands, once wielders of destruction, now meticulously mending broken shutters, patching leaks in the roof, clearing overgrown paths. Ilara, no longer the silent, trembling waif, had helped him. Her small contributions, gathering kindling, helping carry water, even sweeping dust from the floorboards, imbued with a profound sense of purpose. She had started to laugh, a sound like wind chimes, light and free, a melody he hadn't realized his world had been missing. She would spend hours by the stream, tracing patterns in the water with a stick, or exploring the surrounding woods, returning with wildflowers clutched in her hands, offerings of beauty to their nascent home. Elias watched her, a quiet contentment settling in his chest, a feeling as foreign as it was welcome. He still carried the weight of his past, the shadow of his deeds, but it no longer consumed him. Ilara was a living testament to a different path, a tangible reason to lay down the burden of constant vengeance. He had built this place for her, a sanctuary from the world's harshness, a place where she could grow, unburdened by the scars of her early years. And in doing so, he had, unexpectedly, built a home for himself, a refuge not just from danger, but from the relentless solitude that had defined his existence. He would never be a man without shadows. The echoes of past violence would always linger, a subtle scent on the wind, but he had found a new purpose, a different kind of fight. He was no longer just Elias Thorne, the feared gunslinger. He was also, irrevocably, the man who had given a little girl a home, and in doing so had found his own, a quiet, hard-won peace forged in the crucible of compassion and shared hope. The sun dipped below the horizon, bathing the valley in a golden, ethereal light, and a profound sense of resolution, of a cycle finally broken, settled over their small, secluded haven.